What happens when a decorated military officer walks into a courtroom, and her own father stands up to call her a fraud in front of strangers? Not just a disappointment. Not just a failure. A liar. An imposter. A woman who never earned the uniform she wore. But what nobody in that courtroom knew was this. Hidden inside my briefcase was a sealed Pentagon file that had never been opened in civilian court before. And the moment the judge read it, the entire room changed. The reporters stopped whispering. The attorneys stopped talking. And then the judge gave an order that made every single person in that courtroom rise to their feet. That was the first moment in my life. My father looked afraid of me. I was born in a small town where men like my father were treated like monuments. Cedar Hollow wasn't big enough for secrets to stay buried, but it was small enough for pride to live forever. My father, Thomas Bennett, spent 23 years as a military police officer before retiring with a destroyed knee and a personality sharp enough to cut through steel. People respected him because he carried himself like a man who had survived something important. Maybe he had. But by the time I came along, whatever softness he once possessed had already dried up, especially toward women. Girls need stability, he used to say while watching my older brother Jake throw footballs across the yard. Men need purpose. I was 8 years old the first time I realized I would never be enough for him. Jake crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox when he was 16. Dad laughed about it for years. I got a B+ in chemistry once. Dad didn't speak to me for 3 days. My mother, Eleanor Bennett, tried to hold the family together the way people hold cracked glass with trembling hands. She was warm where he was cold, gentle where he was rigid. Sometimes she'd sneak into my room late at night and brush my hair behind my ear while pretending I was "You don't have to become hard to survive him," she whispered once. Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I do. By 17, I had already decided I was leaving Cedar Hollow. Not for college. Not for marriage. For the military. The day my acceptance letter from the United States Military Academy arrived, my hands shook so badly I could barely open it. My mother cried before I even finished reading. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Claire." But my father barely looked up from dinner. "You'll wash out in 6 months." The room went silent. My mother stared at him. "Tom." "No," he interrupted calmly while cutting into his steak. "She's stubborn, not strong. There's a difference." I remember sitting there in that tiny dining room with peeling yellow wallpaper, trying not to let him see how badly those words hurt me. Outside, summer rain tapped softly against the windows. Jake smirked down at his mashed potatoes. And somehow that hurt even more. At West Point, I learned something important. Pain becomes fuel if you let it. I learned how to run until my lungs burned raw. How to survive on 4 hours of sleep. How to keep moving while men twice my size waited for me to fail. Some of them wanted me gone before I even opened my mouth. But after enough years of being underestimated, something strange happens. You stop fearing people. During mountain training exercises, I watched grown men collapse from exhaustion while I kept climbing. Not because I was stronger, because I had spent my entire childhood surviving emotional cold. Physical pain felt simpler, cleaner. When I graduated, my mother drove 9 hours just to watch me receive my commission. My father never came. He claimed he had better things to do. Years later, I found out he spent that weekend drinking at a fishing cabin with friends. Still I served. I missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, relationships that could have become marriages. Meanwhile, Jake drifted from one disaster to another. Failed businesses, DUIs, gambling debt. Every time he collapsed, my father caught him before he hit the ground. "That's my son," Dad always said, like those 3 words explained everything. As I got older, my father's resentment toward me became impossible to ignore. Not openly at first. Quietly, like a man irritated by something he couldn't control. He hated when neighbors thanked me for my service. Hated when people asked about my promotions. One Christmas, a family friend congratulated me on making major. My father snorted into his whiskey. "Military's different now," he muttered. "Half of it's politics." The entire table went silent. My mother just looked exhausted. That was the year I realized she had spent most of her marriage apologizing for a man who never apologized for himself. Then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Merciless. The kind that steals people one piece at a time while everyone pretends hope still exists. I took leave and stayed beside her hospital bed for nearly 6 weeks. At night, machines hummed softly while snow fell outside the windows. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she just held my hand in silence. My father rarely stayed longer than 20 minutes. One evening after she fell asleep, he stood near the doorway staring at me. "You always needed attention," he said flatly. I looked at him in disbelief. "She's dying," I whispered. "And somehow you still make this about yourself." That was the closest I ever came to hitting him. But before I could respond, my mother opened her eyes. She looked terrified. Not of me, of what we had become. She died 2 days later with my hand in hers. At the funeral, people told me she talked about me constantly. That she kept after the burial, while relatives carried casseroles into the church basement, he finally approached me near the cemetery gates. Cold wind moved through the dead grass between us. "You stopped being my daughter," he said quietly, "the moment you chose that uniform over this family." I stared at him for several seconds, certain I had heard him wrong. Then he walked away. Just like that. 3 weeks later, I received the lawsuit. I was standing in my kitchen in Arlington when I opened the envelope. Rain hammered the windows while my coffee went cold beside the sink. I read the papers once. Then twice. Then a third time because my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. My father was suing me for my mother's house, her savings, and nearly every asset she left behind. But the final sentence hollowed out my chest. Claim filed under disputed paternity. According to my father, I wasn't his daughter at all. I didn't sleep that night. The papers stayed spread across my kitchen table, while rain slid down the windows in silver streaks. Every few minutes I reread the same sentence, hoping somehow the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel. Disputed paternity. He wasn't just trying to take my mother's estate. He was trying to erase me from the family completely. Around 3 in the morning, I finally called Jake. I don't even know why. Maybe some foolish part of me still believed blood meant something. He answered sounding irritated. "What? You knew about this?" Silence. Then a sigh. "Dad's doing what he has to do." I gripped the counter harder. "He's accusing Mom of cheating on him." So, that single word hit harder than yelling would've. "So," I repeated. "Claire, come on," he muttered. "Everybody knew you were always her favorite. Dad deserves the house." I laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. "The house Mom paid for. You were never around," he snapped suddenly. "You don't know what things were like after you left." After I left. As if joining the military had been abandonment instead of survival. "You gambled away your own money," I said quietly. "Now you want hers too." His breathing changed. "That told me everything. You think you're better than us because you wear a uniform?" "No. Ian Shuarat. I think Mom deserved better than this." He hung up. I stood there listening to the dead line for several seconds before lowering the phone slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the Virginia sky. And for the first time in years, I cried for my mother instead of simply missing her. The lawsuit spread through Cedar Hollow faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, former neighbors had already chosen sides. Some called quietly to offer sympathy. Others avoided me entirely. Then the local newspaper published the story. Decorated female officer accused in family fraud case. I stared at the article during lunch inside the Pentagon cafeteria, unable to finish eating. Around me, trays clattered and coffee machines hissed while conversations blurred into meaningless noise. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Old classmates. Distant cousins. Reporters. One message simply read, "Is it true your real father was another soldier?" I deleted it immediately. But humiliation settles into the body physically. It changes the way you walk into rooms, the way you hold eye contact. Even at work, I noticed subtle shifts in people's behavior. Questions lingered longer. Conversations stopped when I entered elevators. Nobody directly accused me of lying about my service, but suspicion moves quietly before it speaks out loud. And because much of my record remained classified, I couldn't fully defend myself. That was the cruel genius of what my father had done. He understood just enough about military. 3 days later, I drove back to Cedar Hollow to meet an attorney recommended by an old colonel friend. Her office sat above a hardware store on Main Street. The brass plaque outside read, Evelyn Brooks, attorney at law. Inside smelled like old books and peppermint tea. Evelyn herself looked somewhere in her late 60s with silver hair pinned neatly behind her head, and eyes sharp enough to cut through concrete. She didn't waste time with sympathy. That man's dangerous, she said after reading the lawsuit. He's my father. No, she corrected calmly. He's opposing counsel's client. Learn the difference quickly. I almost smiled. Almost. For 2 hours, she reviewed documents while I explained family history piece by piece. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. Your father's story has holes. What kind of holes? The kind that make judges angry. She slid a photocopy of my birth certificate across the desk. He challenged the authenticity, she explained. But county records show somebody already tried accessing and altering supporting files 6 months ago. Altering. Your father isn't just grieving, she said quietly. He's preparing. A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. Then Evelyn removed her glasses. Tell me about your military record. There's not much I can discuss. I know, she replied. But if this reaches federal territory, surprises can destroy cases. I hesitated. Secrecy had become instinct by then. Some assignments remained classified even now. I served overseas, I said carefully. That part one no. There were operations connected to diplomatic security. Her expression changed slightly. What kind of operations? The kind nobody publicly acknowledges. Silence stretched between us. Outside the office window, a train horn echoed somewhere in the distance. Claire, is there anything federally protected that could verify your service if challenged? Immediately, a memory surfaced. A locked briefing room. A colonel sliding a sealed envelope across a steel table years earlier. If your service record is ever challenged in civilian court, he had warned me. This goes directly to legal counsel only. At the time, I almost laughed. Who would challenge it? Now I knew. I might have something, I said quietly. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Might. I was instructed never to open it unless absolutely necessary. She studied me carefully. Would this qualify as absolutely necessary? I thought about my father standing in court calling me a fraud. About my mother dying while he accused me of selfishness. About the headlines. The whispers. The humiliation. Yes, I answered. That evening, I drove to a secure storage facility outside Alexandria. The sky hung low and gray above the highway while snow threatened in the distance. Inside the storage unit, fluorescent lights buzzed softly against cold metal walls. At the very back sat an old military footlocker scarred from overseas deployments. For a moment, I simply stared at it. So many years of my life buried inside silence. I unlocked it carefully. Inside were old uniforms, photographs, commendations, and beneath them, a flat black document case. My pulse quickened immediately. The seal was still intact. Dark blue wax embossed with the Department of Defense insignia. Stamped in red. Authorized only by federal order. My fingers hovered over it without touching. Suddenly the room felt smaller. I remembered the colonel's warning. Some documents protect information, he had said. Others protect people. I picked up the envelope slowly. And for the first time since by the time Evelyn and I arrived for the preliminary hearing, reporters were already crowded outside beneath gray winter clouds. Camera shutters exploded the moment I stepped from the car. Major Bennett, is your military record fabricated? Did your mother hide your real father? Are federal investigators involved? Evelyn guided me forward without slowing down. Eyes ahead, she murmured. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with quiet excitement. Small-town scandals rarely collided with military secrecy, and people could feel something ugly unfolding. Then I saw my father. Thomas Bennett stood near the front row wearing a dark suit that suddenly looked too large for him. Age had hardened him over the years. His shoulders looked narrower now, but his eyes still carried the same cold certainty I remembered from childhood. Jake stood beside him, avoiding my gaze. For one brief second, I almost walked over there. Not to argue. To beg. Some wounded part of me still wanted my father to admit he'd gone too far. To tell everyone this was a mistake born from grief. Instead, he looked at me the way people look at enemies before battle. Like someone preparing to win. You ready? Evelyn asked quietly. No. That's honest, she replied. Good. Honest people survive cross-examination better. The hearing began with procedural arguments, but underneath every legal phrase sat something deeply personal and poisonous. Opposing counsel, Richard Vance, painted me piece by piece into someone unrecognizable. A manipulative daughter. A woman who abandoned her family. A military officer with suspiciously incomplete records. At one point, Vance held up copies of my service history. Your Honor, he said smoothly, significant portions of Major Bennett's alleged military accomplishments cannot be independently verified. Alleged. We are simply asking whether the defendant exaggerated or falsified elements of her identity for financial gain. Financial gain. As if 20 years of military service had been some elaborate inheritance scam. Judge Harold Whitmore listened carefully without revealing much emotion. He looked to be in his late 70s with tired eyes and a face carved from stone. When court recessed for lunch, I escaped into the hallway near the vending machines, needing air that didn't feel poisoned by accusation. That's where my father found me. You should settle, he said casually. I turned slowly. What? Give Jake the house. Walk away clean. I stared at him in disbelief. You accused Mom of cheating on you. His jaw tightened. That woman poisoned this family against me. The way he said that woman instead of your mother made something inside me finally crack. She loved you, I whispered. No, he snapped. She pitied me. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not anger. Humiliation. The deep rotten kind men carry when they spend their lives terrified they were never respected to begin with. My father leaned closer. You think those medals made you important? He asked quietly. You're still just a girl who ran away. I should have answered. Instead, I noticed his hands trembling. Not from age. From desperation. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. This lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was punishment. He needed to destroy me because my existence reminded him of everything he failed to become. Back inside the courtroom, Evelyn began dismantling his case piece by piece. Bank records showing Jake's debts. Mortgage documents proving my mother paid for most of the house herself. Evidence that my father tried accessing restricted county files months earlier. Judge Whitmore's expression darkened gradually. Then Vance made a mistake. We intend to call witnesses who can testify the defendant frequently exaggerated military accomplishments impossible to verify. Evelyn stood immediately. Impossible for whom? Vance hesitated. She walked toward the evidence table slowly. Your Honor, she said calmly. Opposing counsel continues implying absence of public records equals absence of service. Because complete records are unavailable, Vance shot back. Evelyn turned fully toward him. Because some records are protected. The room went still. Vance scoffed. Protected from a probate court? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me. That look said one thing. Now. My pulse hammered painfully in my chest. Slowly, I reached into my briefcase and removed the sealed black document case. The moment it touched the table, the atmosphere changed. Even Evelyn hadn't expected it to look that official. Several people leaned forward in the gallery. Vance frowned. What exactly is that? Evelyn ignored him. Your Honor, she said carefully. The defense requests permission to submit sealed federal documentation regarding Major Claire Bennett's protected service record. My father laughed under his breath. Oh, this ought to be good. Judge Whitmore extended his hand. Evelyn carried the envelope forward herself. The moment the judge saw the Pentagon seal, his posture shifted instantly. Not dramatically, but enough for everyone in that courtroom to feel it. He inspected the authorization. Your Honor, if there's an admissibility issue. Sit down. The words came out sharper than anyone expected. Even Evelyn blinked. Then the judge looked directly at me. really looked at me for the first time since proceedings began. And suddenly something in his expression resembled respect. My father frowned. What the hell is this, Judge? Whitmore folded the documents carefully and placed both hands flat on the bench. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, you will not speak again unless instructed. The room froze. My father actually laughed once in disbelief. I am sorry. The judge looked toward the bailiff. Then, in a voice that carried through every corner of that courtroom, he said, everyone in this courtroom will stand up immediately. Chairs scraped backward. Confused whispers spread everywhere. Beside me, Evelyn exhaled slowly without speaking. Across the aisle, my father's face lost all color. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the truth had finally entered the room. Nobody moved at first. Not completely. People hesitated halfway out of their chairs while reporters exchanged confused glances. Judge Whitmore remained standing behind the bench with one hand resting on the Pentagon documents. Bailiff, he said calmly, close the courtroom doors. The heavy doors slammed shut with a metallic thud. My father looked around nervously. What is this supposed to mean? The judge ignored him. Then he looked directly at me. Major Claire Bennett, please remain standing. Something shifted in the room the moment he used my rank without hesitation. Not alleged. Not claimed. Recognized. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. The federal documentation submitted to this court confirms portions of Major Bennett's service record are protected under national security classification authorized by the Department of Defense. Whispers exploded instantly. What? Classified? Oh my God. The judge raised one hand for silence. These records further establish that Major Bennett served in multiple authorized operations attached to diplomatic recovery and defense coordination overseas. Vance stood abruptly. Your Honor, I object. You object? Whitmore interrupted sharply. The old judge removed his glasses again. And this time there was visible anger in his eyes. You brought a decorated military officer into civilian court and publicly accused her of fraud without understanding the nature of federal protection statutes. Vance's face drained of color. My father looked completely lost. What decorated officer? He snapped. She worked some office job overseas. Judge Whitmore turned toward him slowly. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, your daughter received commendations this court does not even possess clearance to fully review. Silence swallowed the room. I could hear my own heartbeat. My father stared at me like he had never truly seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. The judge continued reading the portions approved for civilian disclosure. Most details remained vague. But the impact didn't require specifics. Diplomatic extraction support. Personnel recovery coordination. Federal commendation under sealed authorization. Every phrase landed heavier than the last. Jake looked physically sick. Meanwhile, I sat perfectly still because military conditioning teaches you how to control emotion in public. But inside, memories rose violently. Sandstorms swallowing roads in Kuwait. The metallic smell of blood inside transport aircraft. A terrified embassy employee gripping my arm while gunfire echoed through distant streets. Faces of soldiers, those words hit me harder than I expected. Not because strangers believed me now. Because my father was hearing them publicly. Irrefutably. For the first time in my life, another man with authority forced him to confront reality. And he hated it. This is ridiculous. My father snapped suddenly. I don't care what medal she got. She's still not my daughter. Evelyn stood immediately. Actually, Your Honor. We're prepared to address that lie next. She approached the bench carrying another folder. Bailiff. The folder opened carefully. These records were recovered through county archive subpoenas, Evelyn explained. They concern a legal filing made by Mr. Thomas Bennett 22 years ago. My father's entire body stiffened. I noticed it instantly. In 2004, Evelyn continued, Mr. Bennett privately filed documents attempting to surrender partial parental financial responsibility during a period of significant debt. The courtroom murmured again. Jake whispered harshly, Dad, shut up. Judge Whitmore reviewed the papers slowly. Then his expression darkened. These records explicitly identify Claire Bennett as your biological child. My father's mouth opened slightly. No words came out. Evelyn continued with surgical calm. The plaintiff knowingly submitted false claims of disputed paternity to pursue estate seizure and property acquisition. The judge looked furious now. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, did you knowingly provide fraudulent testimony to this court? My father's confidence finally cracked. You don't understand, he muttered. Her mother. No. The judge interrupted sharply. You don't understand the seriousness of what you've done. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the courtroom doors opened again. One approached the bench and handed paperwork to the bailiff. The other briefly scanned the room before his eyes landed on me. A small nod. Professional. Respectful. My father looked terrified now. What the hell is this? Judge Whitmore reviewed the documents carefully. Due to the classified nature of evidence improperly challenged during these proceedings, he said, federal review has been requested regarding potential violations connected to falsified filings and unauthorized attempts to access protected records. My father turned toward Vance in panic. You said this was just probate court. Vance looked ready to faint. Because suddenly this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about federal misconduct. Jake rose halfway from his chair. Dad, what did you do? I didn't do anything. But his voice sounded thin now. Frightened. Old. I watched him unravel in real time. And the strangest part? I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Years of trying to earn love from a man incapable of giving it had exhausted something deep inside me long before this courtroom existed. Judge Whitmore finally turned toward me. Major Bennett, he said more gently. This court owes you an apology. I swallowed hard. You don't owe me anything, Your Honor. Yes, he replied quietly. I believe we do. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me. Because respect from strangers should never feel more healing than love from family. But sometimes it does. My father suddenly pointed at me again, though now his hand visibly shook. She turned everybody against me, he said weakly. Eleanor always chose her over her own family. I stood slowly before Evelyn could stop me. The courtroom fell silent again. For years I imagined confronting him, screaming, demanding answers for every wound he left behind. But when the moment finally arrived, I felt strangely calm. You know what the saddest part is? You still think this is about winning. His eyes flickered. You spent your entire life trying to make me feel small enough for you to feel strong. My voice remained steady. And even now, after everything, you still can't admit the truth. Claire. You didn't lose your daughter today. The words landed softly, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. You lost her years ago. My father looked at me like he'd been struck. And for the first time in my entire life, he had absolutely nothing left to say. Court adjourned shortly after 4 that afternoon. Outside, reporters packed the sidewalks beneath freezing rain while news vans lined the street. Somebody had already leaked enough information for headlines to explode online. Decorated officer cleared in stunning courtroom reversal. Federal documents destroy fraud allegations. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Evelyn and I exited through a private hallway arranged by courthouse security. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as we walked in silence. Finally, she stopped beside the elevator. You did well in there. I laughed weakly. I felt like I was going to pass out. That's called being human. The elevator doors opened. Before stepping inside, I looked at her carefully. Why did you take my case? Evelyn smiled faintly. My husband served in Vietnam, she said quietly. Spent 40 years pretending certain memories didn't hurt him. Her eyes softened. I recognize honorable people when I meet them. The doors closed before I could answer. Outside, cold rain hit hard enough to sting my lungs while federal agents quietly escorted me toward my car. One of them, tall, gray-haired, probably former military himself, paused before I entered the vehicle. You handled yourself professionally, Major. Thank you. He hesitated briefly. For what it's worth, people know what you did overseas, even if they can't say it publicly. Then he walked away. I sat inside the car for several minutes afterward, watching rain blur courthouse lights into streaks of gold. All those years protecting secrets, missing holidays, burying grief, watching soldiers folded into flags. And somehow the thing that nearly destroyed me wasn't war. It was family. 3 weeks later, the judge dismissed every single claim my father filed. Not partially, completely. The ruling included harsh language regarding fraudulent testimony and intentional deception. Federal investigators continued reviewing the forged records requests tied to the case, though Evelyn warned me those outcomes might remain confidential. Jake disappeared almost immediately after the hearings. Rumor said he fled to Florida to avoid debt collectors. My father stayed in Cedar Hollow alone, and after the trial, people treated him differently. Respect built over decades vanished almost overnight. Turns out communities admire proud men only until those men publicly destroy their own daughters, especially military daughters. I returned to my mother's house in early spring. The property sat at the edge of town where maple trees lined the road in uneven rows. When I unlocked the front door for the first time since the funeral, the smell hit me instantly. Lavender, old books, coffee grounds, home. Dust floated through golden afternoon sunlight while silence settled softly around me. For several minutes, I simply stood there listening to the quiet. No acusaciones. No tensión. No waiting for criticism. I walked slowly from room to room. The kitchen curtains my mother loved still hung beside the sink. Her reading glasses remained folded near the living room lamp. A knitted blanket still rested across the couch exactly where she left it before the hospital. Grief returned differently this time, like missing someone instead of drowning in them. Late that evening, while sorting through attic boxes, I found a small cedar chest hidden beneath old winter coats. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, and several sealed envelopes with my name written in my mother's handwriting. My chest tightened immediately. Hands trembling, I opened the first letter. Claire, if you're reading this, then I'm probably gone. And knowing your father, things may already be difficult. I had to stop reading for a moment. Rain tapped softly against the attic windows. Then I continued. Your father was not always cruel. But somewhere along the way, life turned his disappointments into bitterness. And bitterness is a hungry thing. It consumes everyone nearby. Tears blurred the page. I wiped them away quickly and kept reading. Never mistake his inability to love properly as proof that you were hard to love. I pressed the letter against my chest and cried harder than I had during the trial, because after months of being called a liar, a fraud, an imposter, my mother's words finally brought me home to myself. That summer, I renovated the house instead of selling it. Not completely. I kept the creaking floor she loved, the blue kitchen tiles, the garden where she grew tomatoes every spring. But I changed it. But I wanted to leave behind something better than survival. Then one October evening, he came to the house. I saw him through the front window before he knocked. Older now, smaller somehow. The powerful posture he carried my entire childhood had collapsed inward over the past months. He stood near the porch with both hands buried inside his coat pockets while cold wind moved through the trees behind him. I opened the door but stayed inside. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. Claire. His voice sounded fragile, almost unfamiliar. I heard about the scholarship. I waited quietly. He looked past me into the house. Your mother would have liked it. The words hurt more than anger, because for the first time, he sounded sincere. But sincerity arrives too late sometimes. I came to say, he swallowed hard. I made mistakes. I studied his face carefully. The man standing on my porch was no longer terrifying. Just lonely. And somehow that was sadder. My mother gave me this home, I said softly. You gave me every reason to survive. His eyes filled slightly. I think he wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness and access are not the same thing. After a long silence, he nodded once and stepped backward off the porch. Then he walked away slowly into the falling leaves. I never saw him again. People sometimes ask whether winning the case felt satisfying. The truth is, justice is not the same thing as peace. The courtroom gave me back my name, but walking away from my father, finally walking away without needing his approval. That's what healed me. And if this story touched you in some way, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and protecting your family's image? And if you enjoy emotional stories about strength, betrayal, survival, and second chances, subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.